Today's Coach Spotlight, I'm very, very happy to have with us this week Dr. Jo Braid, who works with Dr. Burnout, oddly enough. And also, we've had the pleasure of working together before because Jo's been through the Advanced Burnout Coach Certification Program. Did rippingly, very glad to see how she's going with her business ever since then. Maybe if you tell us kind of how you got into burnout coaching.
Sure. Thanks, Dex. Great to be here. Hi, everyone. So a doctor by training. I originally grew up in the UK, did medical school there, pumped out 100-hour weeks there and thought, you know what, I might head to Australia and see what it's like over there with an Australian passport, as my dad's Australian. And it was fantastic. It was 40-hour weeks and I never returned back to the national health system. I specialised in rehabilitation medicine and I still practice a small amount of traumatic brain injury rehabilitation. And in 2021, I certified with the Life Coach School and have been growing my coaching business ever since October 2021. Last year, and that doesn't lead into the burnout thing just yet, but yeah.
So have you had a personal experience of burnout then?
I have, yeah. So I had a private clinic working with a theme of integrative medicine or functional medicine, and I grew that up in Orange from about 2017. Solo practice, had a health coach working with me virtually, and it was all consuming. I could see now that personality that I've got where I had a newborn and I was kicking off a clinic, my third newborn. And I was like, great, he's sleeping from 7 till 10 p.m. Now's my time to study and then my time to read gut health results and things like that. And there was sort of no boundary. There was no limit. There was no saying no, essentially, to what I was throwing myself into. And it was 2021 in May when I flew over to the UK to look after my mum who was unwell. I had that glorious 2 weeks in hotel quarantine in Sydney, which was actually glorious. And I really stopped and I evaluated, and I was already having coaching through LCS at that point. And I sort of could then understand what was going on and realized I had a choice in stopping that clinic or continuing with it. And before, I'd been a really sort of all or nothing. You can't give up on your patients. You can't give up on what you've set up already. And by December of 2021, I'd closed that clinic down. And lived experience, got through it, can still see my tendencies to go for things. I'm going to do my best to never let that happen again.
So common amongst doctors just to keep going beyond the limits or not have any limits.
Right. Yes, exactly. Yeah.
So you work with doctors now then. What's happening there?
Yeah. So I market to doctors who are specialists, and I get a whole range of healthcare providers that come and work with me, and some people who aren't in healthcare. I do individual coaching, which I absolutely love, with a 12-week program that I set up from doing your certification last year, Dex. And as of last year, I also do some group coaching in person, which I hadn't really seen coming. That was a request by one of my colleagues in the emergency department locally. And wellbeing is a very strong focus in all the training schemes for doctors now. And she's like, can you do the wellbeing part of our training program? I was like, sure, okay. So often different doctors are coming in, so I sort of have to set up that space every time, which is absolutely fine. And I did 12 hours of coaching and teaching last year, and then they've re-engaged me this year, but on a monthly sort of 3 to 4 hour session rather than just short little 1 hour sessions. We found the 2 hour sessions went a lot deeper than the 1 hour sessions, so we're going for the longer blocks now. So I have a sense of working locally as well, which is really nice. I don't actually work in that hospital as a physician, which is maybe a good thing as well. I show up with my coach hat on and coach these emergency doctors.
I think sometimes the perception is moving from one-to-one to group that it's going to be harder to get people to be vulnerable, raw, honest in a group. What's your experience been of that?
Such a great question. You know, I sort of had my hand in the air saying, yes, I can do group with no control as to who would show up. So they have an allocated 4 hours of teaching every Thursday. If you're on shift, the seniors cover the floor so the juniors can go to training. If you're off shift, it's optional. You might be doing night shifts because they do 50% nights in that department. So they're not going to show up for a 2 p.m. teaching. And my experience is coaching women in healthcare. That's sort of where my marketing goes towards. And I have really only had women engage with me. But there's quite a lot of guys in ED medicine. So it didn't make any difference after all. They're wonderful humans who, with the tone sort of set for the space for what we're going to be talking about, I've gone right into imposter syndrome, other people's opinions, like fear of making a mistake, the 3 Ps, perfectionism, procrastination, people pleasing. It doesn't matter what gender people are. And I got a bit hung up on not always having the same people. And I was like, oh, I'm going to have to keep teaching the model or keep growing on what I've taught each time. And honestly, that wasn't a problem as well. So funny what our brains try and trick us into. This is going to be a drama. And I had quite a few very regular people who then really made some significant changes, particularly in their personal lives as a result of the workplace coaching that I was providing for them. It's been great.
So terrific to hear. And I've had a similar experience. I work with type A executives, men. And on paper, that wouldn't work in a group. But what I've found is they love the group even more because then they see they're not the only person having those challenges, and that in fact being raw and open about it is an enormous relief.
Yes. Yeah. It's great. I found it didn't work when we had a consultant in there. So when we had a senior or an attending in there, the dynamic was very different. But we soon worked that out, changed that up, and that was a good observation and a good change to make there.
Super, fantastic. So what coaching tip do you have to share with other coaches in the group today?
Okay.
What works for you?
What works for me? So many different things. I have this sense of sowing seeds far and wide, like just trying a lot of different things out and seeing how that lands and seeing how that might sort of grow with time. So there's that sort of concept. And the other one I wanted to talk about was growing your own self-concept, which was definitely something you talk about in the certification. And that's been a very ever-evolving process. And I don't think there's any end point with that of, well, who am I? And also in the future version of me, what does she show up and do? And who does she contact? And how is her tone when she communicates in the written word or in a coaching scenario or in a teaching scenario as well? So I think really thinking about that self-concept and that self-concept of maybe 6 or 12 months on, I really like working with that version of me.
Every time I see you now, you have more and more self-assurance and more self-confidence.
Yeah, it feels that way. My podcast, I started in October last year. That was so much of a smaller mountain than I actually just didn't make it be a big thing. I knew I was going to show up imperfectly, and I was okay with that being an example of not perfect and fully finished and everything edited out. And I have evolved so much since I did my first episode, which I'm a bit like, oh, if I could change my first episode from who I am now to who I was back then, that could be a good thing. But I guess that's just my evolution of what I've done. I've had so many wonderful people come in on my podcast, as well as doing it as a solo venture. And and this week I was just listed next to Brene Brown as a podcast resource on burnout, which I was rather excited by. Somebody's personal choice of podcasts, but that was exciting.
Yeah.
So
I think the same way. Well, most of us wait to do a podcast until we're perfect. And I don't think a podcast ever starts from that place. It starts from wherever you are.
Yes.
And it builds and builds and builds.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So what else is there something else burning in your brain you'd love to share with people on the group today?
I guess get clear in your messaging. That might be a marketing tip for people. I'm sure they're always working on that as well. That's something that I continually work on. How do the audience, how do my potential clients or my audience realize what kind of work I do, and do they see themselves as the kind of person that wants to work with me as a burnout coach? Because there are many of us, fortunately, now as burnout coaches around the world, which is great. So yeah, I am looking to implement more stories in my social media so that there can be some relatability to stories there. But yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I haven't got heaps of other tips, but I would just say collaboration for me has been a really fun thing. And if those opportunities come up for you to collaborate and it feels congruent with the direction that you're intending on going in, jump in and see where that might lead to for you. Yeah.
Okay, and last thing, what kind of person would you like others to refer to you?
Sure. Okay. So I guess the kind of person I work with is a woman specialist in her 40s or 50s, generally got some children, and is doing the juggle of working full-time or close to full-time, not loving her career as much as she had been before, feeling somewhat exhausted and not really sure about how the next 10 or 15 years are going to look with her career, but open to recentering, reconnecting with herself and reviewing like how it can look and what needs to change for that energy to come back in, that enthusiasm for different facets of life, and that sense of enjoying with productivity what she does on the daily.
What's the elevator pitch for that? So what's the 12-word version?
Yeah, good question.
Specialist female doctors in their 40s and 50s.
Yeah, I have. That's it.
All right, so super to see you again today and hear from you. Anything you'd like to add in closing?
Sure. Did you want me to say anything about the advanced burnout certification at all? So you
can.
Yeah, it was great. It was so fun. Really great weekly sessions with a lot of live coaching in the certification, and great great questions that you offered to us in your workbook that you provided, so that for our niche that we are working with, we are creating our own specific answers to the niche that we work with as well. They were general questions, but we could apply them to our different areas, and the group of us that were in your program the first time certainly did have different areas that we work in around the world. And yeah, I was just catching up with Johnny just the other week as well, and we've formed some really strong friendships from the group that we had there, Dex. So thank you for that. It was a real propulsion into a different version of myself, a self-concept of I am a certified burnout coach, and let's go with that.
Okay, marvelous. Well, so good to speak with you this week. And if anybody's asking questions in the Facebook group, I'm sure you can pick up on that.
Thanks for the opportunity, Dex.
Pleasure.
Cheers.